Good evening. This is CTV News for Friday, May 16th. I'm Byron Scott.
And I'm Melissa Wright. Thanks for joining us. A volunteer firefighter who pled guilty to setting 3 fires in the county is headed to prison. At a press conference today, State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy announced 20-year-old Tyree Turney has been sentenced to 30 years behind bars.
The judge, when imposing the sentence, went above the recommended guidelines, and our office asked that he go above those recommended guidelines because of the serious nature of the offenses and the people who were involved in these offenses.
Officials say as a result of Turney's sentence, they will be more stringent when reviewing background checks for future firefighters. 2 of the 3 suspects arrested for allegedly killing a teenage girl in Riverdale appeared in court this afternoon.
Authorities say the tragic murder was gang-related. They also say the suspects knew the 14-year-old victim. Keisha Butts is at the courthouse in the Marlboro with the latest.
This was an emotional afternoon as I sat in the courtroom and watched one of the suspects burst into tears. But the judge had no sympathy. She ordered both suspects who allegedly murdered a 14-year-old girl and left her body in a creek be held without bond. Their names are Cynthia Hernandez Nucamende and Joel Escobar. Cops say the teenagers lured the victim, Funes Diaz, to the woods behind an apartment complex in Riverdale. The 14-year-old girl was allegedly beat to death with a machete and baseball bat. Residents are shocked by this crime.
Sorry to see someone, lose their life unnaturally. Guess whoever's, involved, I hope they're found and brought to justice, I would imagine.
At the courthouse, Keisha Butts, CTV News.
A bond hearing for the 3rd suspect is pending.
Well, police arrest one of their own. It happened Wednesday night in Oxon Hill when state police pulled over a motorist for allegedly driving while using a handheld cell phone. It turns out the driver was a Prince George's police officer, Alita Gaskill. Authorities say Gaskill did say she was with county police, but allegedly refused to identify herself and resisted arrest. State police put the cuffs on Gaskill, who has been suspended with pay and relieved of her duties on the police force while she is on a no-contact status with the public. Well, it was 65 years ago today, May 17, 1954, that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled segregated schools are unconstitutional. The landmark decision is Brown versus Board of Ed.
In that case, Oliver Brown filed a class action suit after his daughter was denied entrance into an all-white elementary school in Topeka, Kansas. Here to talk more about the case and the impact is Dr. Alvin Thornton, chair of Prince George's School Board. Thank you so much for joining us.
Indeed.
Starting here, can you give us a sense of how significant this ruling was?
Well, this ruling actually ended apartheid in America. At that time, Americans were separated by government, by official law based upon race, particularly in public education. And so African Americans, black kids went to separate schools and white kids went to separate schools. This case, which was unanimously decided by the Supreme Court in response to Thurgood Marshall's jurisprudence and advocacy, overruled that and essentially ended Jim Crow apartheid in public education.
Why did black folk want to integrate the schools? This wasn't about black people wanting to sit next to white people. Well, what was behind the move to integrate the schools?
Education is the great equalizer in our nation, and it is through education that people move up economically in our nation, and black people understood that as long as they were receiving unequal education, then they could not move up the economic ladder. Also, their tax monies were being paid for, were paying for schools that their kids could not access, both secondarily and collegiately. And so black people, led by Thurgood Marshall and others, the great warriors, moved to end that system. I grew up in a segregated system. I'm a son of Brown. I was born in 1948, and I never went to an integrated school in Alabama. So I'm a son of Jim Crow, I'm a son of apartheid, and yet I'm now Professor Dr. Alvin Thornton. That's the result of Brown.
Now, you were a kid at the time, but do you recall this ruling as a kid?
Absolutely. I was 6 years old, but we were in the midst of intense racism in Alabama, near Tuskegee, where I grew up. But I am the result of Brown, so if people want to know what Brown was, look at me.
So many states didn't like the ruling. So Virginia responded by closing school doors. 4 years later, several southern states still maintained segregation. Can you tell me what do school systems look like now as a result of what happened here?
Well, school systems are still largely segregated in America, which is the interesting thing. They are not what we call de jure segregated, which is by law. They are de facto segregated based upon housing patterns and residency. In fact, school systems are probably more segregated now. I don't call it segregation. I mean, they are not. There's not proximity for children, largely because they live in different communities and different homes. So we have a great challenge. The journey is still continuing, even right here in Prince George's County in the state of Maryland, because Prince George's was obviously one of the great resistors to the Brown decision.
Talk about the impact here in this area.
Well, we filed a case in 1972 in Prince George's County called Vons versus the Prince George's County Board of Education. We didn't end that case until 1998. So we did not effectively desegregate our schools using Brown jurisprudence until 1998. I was on the board, I was chairman of the board at the time when we ended that case with the federal district court here in Greenville. So the journey still continues. I would like to remind the people that what we now call Thornton, which is adequacy and equity funding, and Kerwin, which everybody's talking about, that's the legacy of Brown. So it's no longer about putting children together physically in a building, it's about providing equity and adequacy for children, no matter based upon what zip code they live in.
Yeah, I was going to ask, if the schools look pretty much as they did, say, back in the 50s, then is that the issue now, or is it quality of school, quality of education?
It is about making sure that children are not an extension of the parents to whom they are born or the community in which they live, which is what I call zip code. And so we make sure that as a matter of state law, not county, that children receive resources going to them no matter where they live. And that's the Brown legacy. That's what Thurgood would want us to focus on.
So can I ask you, why do you think we're stuck in this place? You know, why are we not seeing that change? Why are schools not, you're not having black and minorities and Caucasians? Why are we not integrating?
The one thing that Brown did not do is deal with childhood poverty. See, we have a major national crisis of childhood poverty. We also have massive maldistribution of income and wealth in our nation. And so segregation reflects that. You separate people based upon how much money they make and based upon the poverty of their children.
Based on the winds prevailing today, what does the future hold for the school systems, for education in general in our schools?
If we raise up young Thurgoods as young lawyer advocates, as servant advocate leaders, it's going to be okay because the struggle continues. It's a dialectical struggle. So those people, those young lawyers who are graduating from school, they're NAACP types, they're ACLU types, and they advocate for a jurisprudence that would be an umbrella over children.
Okay, Dr. Thornton, it's always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Also tomorrow, Fairmont Heights Library is hosting an event for former classmates and other alumni to talk about their school days in Prince George's. Again, the event is tomorrow at the Fairmont Heights Library on Kolb Street at 2 in the afternoon.